"Who made these biscuits?" the cowboy asked. Then he saw the woman nobody ever took notice of. A true story. There is a kind of person who keeps the world running, but never gets a thank you for it. You know the type. They are the first ones to arrive, and the last ones to leave. They do the work quietly, without making a fuss, without asking for anything in return. Most of the time, nobody even notices they are there, and somehow, over the years, those people learn to carry that invisibility like a coat they never take off. This is a story about one of those people. Her name was Dora Nell Pruitt. She was 63 years old. She had gray hair that she always kept pinned back, a pair of reading glasses she never used for reading, and hands that looked like they had been working since before most people in that county were born. Which, honestly, they had. Dora lived alone in a small house at the edge of a dusty little town in West Texas. The kind of town where the gas station and the post office are practically the same building and everybody knows what you had for dinner last Tuesday. She had lived there her whole life. She had watched it get smaller over the decades as the young people left and the old ones passed on, and she had stayed anyway, because that is just who she was. Her husband, Hank, had died 8 years before this story takes place. He was a good man, Hank. Not a complicated man, not a famous man, just a solid, quiet, hard-working man who loved his wife and his land and his coffee black. When he passed, Dora did what women in that part of the world often do. She kept going. She kept the house clean and the garden watered, and she found something to do with her hands every single day, because sitting still with grief was something she could not afford. That something turned out to be cooking for the Harlan Ranch. The Harlan Ranch sat about 4 miles outside of town, up a dirt road that got muddy in the winter and dusty the rest of the year. Ray Harlan, who ran the place, was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray mustache and the kind of handshake that made your knuckles hurt. He was not a mean man. He was just the kind of man who did not think too much about the people around him unless they caused him a problem. His world was cattle and fence lines and weather and money, and everything else was background noise. Ray had lost his regular cook to a move to Amarillo back in the fall of 2001, and the ranch hands had been eating terrible food for about 3 months when somebody in town mentioned that Dora Pruitt used to cook for church suppers and she might be looking for something to do. Ray drove over to her house one evening, knocked on her door, and offered her $20 a Saturday morning to come cook breakfast for the crew. Dora said she would do it for $15 and the leftover biscuits. Ray laughed and said fine. That was the beginning of 11 years. Every Saturday morning, Dora was at the Harlan Ranch cookhouse before the sun came up. She did not drive after dark, so in the winter she had her neighbor's boy drop her off, and in the summer she walked the 2 miles along the road by herself with a flashlight in her hand. She was not scared of the dark. She was not scared of much of anything, really. The cookhouse was a long, low-ceilinged room attached to the back of the main barn. It had a big cast-iron stove that took forever to heat up in the cold months, a long wooden table that could seat 12 if they squeezed, a row of mismatched coffee mugs hanging on hooks above the counter, and a smell about it that was somewhere between old wood and bacon grease, and something you could not quite name but that made you feel like sitting down. Dora always started the fire first, even in summer, because the stove needed time. Then she would unpack whatever she had brought from home in her cloth bag. She always brought her own flour, her own lard, her own buttermilk, because she did not trust other people's pantries. While the stove got going, she would mix the biscuit dough by hand in a big clay bowl she had owned since before her wedding. She never measured anything, not one single ingredient. Everything was done by feel, by texture, by the way the dough behaved under her palms. When her sons were small and still at home, they used to sit on the kitchen counter and watch her do this, and they would ask her, "Mama, how much flour?" And she would say, "Enough." "How much buttermilk?" "Enough." "How do you know when it's right?" She would look at them with that steady look of hers and say, "Your hands know. You just have to let them." Her sons had grown up and moved away. One was in Houston, one was in Dallas. They called on birthdays and holidays. They were good sons. They were just busy, the way people get busy, and the distance between a phone call and an actual visit grows in ways that nobody really plans for. So Dora cooked by herself on those Saturday mornings in that smoky cookhouse, and the biscuits she made were extraordinary in a way that nobody in that place had ever stopped to put into words. The ranch hands would come in between 5:30 and 6. They were a rotating crew, some of them local boys who had worked for Ray for years, some of them seasonal workers who passed through for a few months and moved on. They were the kind of men who worked hard with their bodies all week and were hungry in a serious way by Saturday morning. They came in with their boots loud on the plank floor and their hats dripping in the wet season and their faces already sun-dark even in February. They said things like "mornin'" and "pass the butter" and "reckon it'll rain today," and they ate with the focused energy of people who have a long day in front of them. Dora put the food on the table. She poured the coffee. She went back to the stove. The men ate. Nobody said thank you. Not in a rude way exactly. More in the way that you do not thank the sky for the sun. It was just there. The food was just there. Dora was just there. This went on for 11 years. Think about that for a moment. 11 years of Saturday mornings. That is more than 570 breakfasts. More than 570 times she got up before dawn and walked or rode to that cookhouse and built the fire and mixed the dough and cooked for people who ate everything she made and left without looking back. She never complained about it. Not once, not to anyone. If you had asked her, she probably would have said it was a good job. She got to cook, which she loved. She got the leftover biscuits, which she ate during the week with butter and honey. She got out of the house on Saturday mornings, which kept her from sitting too long with her thoughts. It was a good arrangement, but something was missing from it, and she would not have been able to tell you what, because she had been missing it for so long she no longer remembered it had a name. The man who changed everything arrived in late March of 2009. His name was Calhoun Lee. Calhoun was 47 years old and looked maybe 55, the way men who have spent most of their lives outdoors tend to. He was not a big man, but he was built in a way that made you think of fence posts and dry oak, lean and tough and not going anywhere in a hurry. He had a quiet that was different from the quiet of the other hands. Their quiet was the quiet of men who were just not saying much. His was the quiet of someone who had learned to pay attention. He had come from somewhere in the Panhandle, or maybe it was New Mexico, depending on who you asked, and nobody really knew too much about him, except that he was good at his job and did not cause trouble, and paid for his own coffee when he was in town. Ray had hired him to work the fence lines on the east pasture, which was a 3-week job if the weather held. Calhoun showed up that first Saturday and sat at the far end of the table, the way new people always do, and he ate what was in front of him the same as everyone else. But he ate differently. It is hard to explain exactly. It was not that he was slower, though he was a little slower. It was more that he was present in a way that the other men were not. He looked at what was on his plate. He tasted things. When he poured himself coffee, he did not pour it while he was already looking somewhere else. He was just there, paying attention. Nobody noticed this about him either, but Dora did, from the stove, in the way that people who have spent their whole lives being unnoticed become very good at noticing other people. The morning it happened was the second Saturday Calhoun had been there. It was an April morning, warm already even at that hour, with the sky going from black to gray, to the color of old pewter out past the barn doors. The stove was putting out more heat than it needed to, and the cookhouse smelled like coffee and pork fat, and something sweet from the pan of biscuits Dora had just pulled out and set on the middle of the table. The men were eating. Someone was talking about a section of fence that had gone down in the night. Someone else was arguing about the weather. Ray Harlan was at the head of the table going through a folded piece of paper that might have been a bill or might have been a letter from the look of his face. Calhoun reached over and took a biscuit from the pan. He broke it open with his thumbs the way you do, and the inside was that particular white that is almost cream-colored, soft and steaming, with that slight pull to it that good biscuit dough has when it has been handled right. He put a small amount of butter on it. He took a bite. He stopped chewing. This sounds like a small thing, but it was not a small thing, and if you had been watching you would have known it was not. He stopped chewing, and he looked down at what he was holding, and something crossed his face that was hard to describe. It was not just surprise. It was something closer to recognition, like hearing a piece of music you had not heard in 20 years, and suddenly remembering exactly where you were the first time you heard it. He sat there for what was maybe 4 or 5 seconds, which is a long time to be still at a table full of people who are eating and talking and not looking at you. Then he looked up. He looked at the other men at the table, and then he looked around the room, and then he asked, in a voice that was not loud at all, just clear and even and genuinely curious, "Who made these biscuits?" The table did not exactly go quiet, but there was a shift. One of the older hands, a man called Pete, who had worked the Harlan Ranch for 9 years, looked up from his plate with a faintly confused expression, like someone had asked who made the table. He thought about it for a second. Then he jerked his thumb toward the stove without looking over there. "Dora," he said, and went back to his food. Calhoun turned and looked at the stove. Dora had her back to the room. She was washing out the mixing bowl, the water running hot over her hands. She had heard the question. She had heard her name. She kept washing the bowl. She was not being rude or shy. It was just that in 11 years, nobody had ever followed up. The question had always died at the thumb jerk. The answer was always good enough for the asker. She did not expect this time to be any different. It was different. Calhoun Lee pushed his chair back from the table. He picked up his plate and his coffee mug, and he carried them across the kitchen to the counter. Nobody did this. The unspoken arrangement in that cookhouse was that the men ate and Dora cleaned, and those two things did not overlap. Calhoun either did not know this or did not care. He set his things on the counter next to the sink. Dora still had not turned around. He stood there for a moment, and then he said, simply and without any fanfare at all, "Need any help?" Now she turned around. She looked at him the way you look at something unexpected. Not alarmed, just recalibrating. "No," she said. "I'm fine." He nodded. He did not move. He was holding his hat now, which he had taken off when he came to the counter, and he was turning it slowly in his hands, which was the sign of a man who had something to say and was working out how to say it. He said, "Those are the best biscuits I have ever eaten in my life." Dora blinked. "My mother made biscuits." He paused. "These are better than hers." He said it plainly, without any exaggeration, the way you state a fact about the weather. "I just wanted you to know that." Then he put his hat back on, and he walked out of the cookhouse, and the screen door swung shut behind him. Dora stood at the sink for a long time after that. The water was still running. She did not turn it off right away. She stood there with her hands under the water, and she looked out the little window above the sink, which had a view of the back lot and the water tank, and a stretch of fence line that went all the way to the horizon. She was not crying. She was not the type, or at least she had not been for a long time, but there was something happening in her chest that she did not quite have a word for. It was warm, and it was strange, and it had been a very long time since she had felt it. Someone had seen her, not the food. Her, the hands she had used to make the food, the years of practice that lived in those hands. Someone had tasted what she made and understood that a person had made it, and that person had skill and history and something worth acknowledging. It sounds simple. It was simple. That is exactly the point. The following Saturday, Calhoun came in with the other men, sat at the same far end of the table, and said good morning to her when he sat down. He used her name. "Good morning, Dora." Not ma'am. Not a nod. Her name. She said good morning back. It felt strange in her mouth, like a word she had not used in a while. He did not make a big deal of it. He did not sit closer to the stove, or try to start a whole conversation, or treat her any differently in front of the other men than he would have treated any person he was saying good morning to. He was just polite. Normally, genuinely polite, the way some people are, because it is simply who they are. Over the next few weeks, he learned a few things about her. He learned that she had 2 sons. He learned that her husband had passed. He learned that she had been cooking at the Harlan Ranch for 11 years, which made him go quiet for a moment in a way she noticed. He did not say anything dramatic about that. He just said 11 years is a long time to be good at something. She told him about the biscuit recipe one morning when he asked. Or rather, she tried to. She started explaining and then stopped, because there was nothing to explain. There was no recipe. There were no measurements. There were hands and memory, and the particular way the dough felt when it was right. She looked at her own hands while she was trying to explain it, and Calhoun watched her, and then he said, "Sounds like the kind of thing you carry in you." "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what it is." It was the longest conversation she had had at the Harlan Ranch in 11 years. Things changed after that, but slowly, the way real things change. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that anyone announced or even really noticed while it was happening. Pete, the older hand who had worked there for 9 years, started saying thank you when he got up from the table. Not every week, but most weeks. It was a small thing, but Dora noticed it every time. He did not know why he had started doing it. He probably would have said it just seemed right, if anyone had asked. No one asked. A younger hand named Travis started calling her by her first name instead of ma'am. He had heard Calhoun do it, and it had not seemed like a remarkable thing, so he had just started doing it too. He was 22 years old, and he was the kind of young man who picks things up from the people around him, which is either a good quality or a dangerous one depending on who is around him. In this case, it was good. Ray Harlan himself asked her one morning how she made the biscuits. He had never once in 11 years asked her anything about the cooking. He had eaten it and paid for it, and that was the whole of their relationship. But one Saturday he came in early, before the other men, and he stood at the counter with his coffee, and he watched her work the dough, and he said, "You know, these are the best biscuits in 3 counties. How do you make them like that?" Dora looked at him. She thought about it. Then she said, 80 years of practice." Ray laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not a polite one. "Well," he said, "don't go dying on me then. I can't afford to lose you." It was maybe not the most eloquent thing anyone had ever said to her, but it was something. She thought about it on the walk home that morning, and she realized it was the first time in a very long while that anyone had said something like that to her. "Don't go. I need you. You matter to this place." It meant more than he knew. It probably means more than most people know when they say things like that, which is why it is worth saying them more often. One afternoon in October, about 6 months after Calhoun had first asked about the biscuits, Dora got a phone call from her daughter-in-law. Her name was Pam. She was married to Dora's younger son, and she was a nice enough woman who lived a busy life in Dallas, with a career and 2 small children, and the kind of schedule that leaves very little room for anything that is not already on a list somewhere. Pam and Dora had a fine relationship. Not a close one, not a difficult one, just the kind of polite and friendly relationship that in-laws sometimes have when there is not a lot of shared history between them. They saw each other at Christmas, and sometimes in the summer, and they talked on the phone every few weeks about the grandchildren, and the weather, and the garden. But this call was different. Pam said she had been thinking about Dora, not in a worried way, exactly, but in the way you think about someone when a quiet feeling tells you that you have not been paying enough attention to them. She said she had been talking to her husband, Dora's son, and they had both been a little bothered by the thought of her out there in that house alone week after week, and would it be okay if Pam drove out for a weekend, just to visit, just to be there. Dora was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then she said, "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," Pam said. "I want to." Dora told her to come. Pam drove out the following weekend with a bag of groceries and a small plant she had picked up at a nursery on the way through town. She did not know why she bought the plant. It just felt like the right thing to bring. Dora put it on the windowsill in the kitchen and looked at it for a moment and said it was a nice plant. Then they had dinner and talked about the grandchildren and the garden, and Pam asked about the ranch, and for the first time in a long time, Dora talked about it like it was something she was proud of. She talked about the stove in the early mornings, and the way the biscuits came out different when the weather was dry versus when it was humid. Pam listened, really listened, not just waiting to talk. That evening, Pam said, "Will you teach me to make those biscuits?" Dora looked at her. In all the years she had been making biscuits, all the Saturdays, all the ranch hands, all the pans that had come and gone, no one had ever asked to learn. She did not answer right away. She was thinking about what it meant to have something in you that no one else has ever asked for, something that has been yours alone for so long that you have half forgotten it could belong to anyone else, something that will disappear when you do, unless someone asks for it before then. She looked at Pam. "Get your hands in here," she said. That Sunday morning, the two of them stood at the kitchen counter together, and Dora showed Pam how to make biscuits. Not with a recipe card, not with measurements, but with her hands guiding Pam's hands. "Here," she would say. "Feel that? That's not quite right yet. A little more. There. Feel the difference?" Pam felt it, or she was beginning to feel it, which is how it always starts. The dough they made that morning was not as good as Dora's. Of course it was not. But it was better than Pam expected, and when they came out of the oven and she tasted one, she made a sound that made Dora laugh out loud in a way she had not laughed in longer than she could remember. "They're not like yours," Pam said. "They will be," Dora said. "You just have to make them a few thousand more times." Pam said she would, and she meant it. She came back the following month, and the month after that. She brought her older daughter the third time, and the girl stood on a step stool next to Dora and mixed the dough with small, serious hands, and asked a great many questions, the way children do when they are genuinely interested in something. Dora answered every question. She liked explaining things to a child who actually wanted to know. Calhoun Lee finished his fence work at the Harlan Ranch in April of 2009, and moved on, the way ranch hands do. He did not make a big departure. One Saturday he was there, and the next Saturday he was not, and Pete mentioned to no one in particular that he had heard Calhoun had taken a job over in the next county. Dora noted his absence the way you note when a lamp goes out in a room. The room is the same room, but something about the quality of the light has changed. She hoped he was doing well. She thought he probably was, because he was the kind of person who carries his good qualities with him wherever he goes, and good qualities tend to serve a person. She never saw him again. That is just how some stories go. A person walks into your life, does one thing, and walks back out, and the thing they did is still there long after they are gone. The last Saturday morning this story is about was in November, 2 years after Calhoun had asked his question. It was cold that morning, a real cold, the kind that comes off the flat land in the night and gets under your collar before you have even opened the door. Dora walked to the ranch as usual, flashlight in hand, her breath making clouds in the dark. The cookhouse was cold when she got there, and the stove took a while to get going, and her hands were stiff from the walk, so she flexed them a few times over the warming iron until they loosened up. The men came in at the usual time, some new faces, some familiar ones. Travis was there, and Pete, and Ray Harlan at the head of the table with his coffee. There were 2 younger men she did not know yet, who sat quietly and did not say much. She put the biscuits on the table. Travis said, "Good morning, Dora." Pete said, "Smells like a good morning to me." Ray Harlan said, "Best part of the week." One of the 2 new men, without looking up, because he was already reaching for a biscuit, said, "Who made these?" The table went very slightly quiet. Travis and Pete both looked at him. Then they both looked at Dora. Dora looked at the young man. "I did," she said. He took a bite and closed his eyes for just a second. "Ma'am," he said, "these are incredible." "Thank you," she said. She said it like she meant it, because she did. She said it like someone who has learned, after a very long time, that receiving a compliment is not something you have to deflect, or dismiss, or wave away. You can just hold it. You can just say thank you, and mean it, and let that be enough. She went back to the stove. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot that was always 1 cup more than the crew needed. She leaned against the counter, and she looked out the little window above the sink, and she drank it slowly, while the men ate and talked, and the morning came up gold and cold over the flat Texas land. She stayed a while after the plates were cleared. She did not hurry out the door the way she used to. She sat at the end of the table with her coffee, and she was still. Not invisible, just still. There is a difference, and she knew it now. This story is not about biscuits, though the biscuits are real, and they really were that good. It is about what happens when one person takes 3 seconds to notice another person and say so. It is about the way that small act moves through the world around it, like a stone dropped in water, touching things that are far from where it started. It is about a woman who cooked for 500 Saturdays and was not seen, and then was, and how that changed her. Not all at once, not dramatically, not in any way that would make a good movie scene. Just slowly, the way a room changes when someone finally opens a curtain that has been closed for years. The room is the same room, but the light is different. Everything looks a little different in that light. Calhoun Lee did not do anything complicated. He asked one question. He carried his plate to the sink. He said what he thought in a plain and honest way. He said her name. That was all. It cost him nothing. It took 30 seconds. It is worth thinking about who in your own life you have been passing over. Who has been doing the quiet, necessary, invisible work in your house, your office, your family, your community, and has been so good at making it look easy that you have forgotten to wonder who is making it happen. Who is the Dora in your life? When did you last look at them and actually say, I see you? You are good at what you do. This place would be different without you. 30 seconds. It costs you nothing. And for the person on the other side of those 30 seconds, it might just be the thing that changes everything. Dora Nell Pruitt kept cooking at the Harlan Ranch until she was 68. When she finally stopped, Ray Harlan threw her a small party in the cookhouse, which no one had planned to do and which happened somewhat spontaneously because Travis bought a cake from the bakery in town on his way in that morning, and one thing led to another. Pete made a speech that was not much of a speech, but that was very sincere. Ray shook her hand and said she was the best cook in the county, and he meant it. Pam still makes the biscuits. She is not as good as Dora, but she is getting closer. Her daughter, who is now 9, makes them with her sometimes on Sunday mornings, standing on the same step stool, asking the same questions. Pam answers every one of them. She tells her daughter what Dora told her. Your hands will know. You just have to let them. The recipe was never written down. It does not need to be. It lives in the hands now, moving forward, the way things that really matter usually do.